I thank you. We'll do some brief introductions so that you just know who we are and the organizations that we come to you from. I am Rebecca Oyama. I work at the East Bay Community Law Center. I'm a staff attorney and clinical supervisor in our Clean Slate unit. And we are also affiliated with Berkeley Law School, where we supervise law students in practical lawyering in our cases. And I'll just pass it to Molly.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Molly, and I'm a lawyer and fellow at Legal Aid at Work. And we have workers' rights clinics all throughout the state that helps secure people's civil rights in the workplace and in the job application process. And I have a few cousins who've been in and out of prison. And so they've looked for work, and this issue is close to me. So I know the process can be tricky. Karnik?
Hi, yes, I'm Karnik. I am a law student, intern, a clinic student at the East Bay Community Law Center. I'm actually supervised by Rebecca Oyama. And so I do clean slate work under her.
Great. And we just wanted to explain a couple of things about expectations for today's session, since it is only an hour, and we do want to make sure that we can deliver to you as much information as we have prepared for you today. So unfortunately, we're going to have to limit question and answers. We will try to be monitoring the chat for questions that come up. We will not, unfortunately, be able to have a robust question and answer period at the end of the session. However, our contact information is in the presentation, and we welcome you to follow up with us if you have any specific questions or situations that you wanted to reach out to us after today's training. And I'll also just mention something about language today. For many years, we've heard people use words involving someone who's had justice system involvement, such as convict or ex-con or offender. And for also many years, incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people have been arguing that not only are these labels painful for them, but they're also not neutral, and they really impact their ability to live a life free from the burdens of incarceration and the labels of it. And that's actually backed up by studies which have shown that when people have been surveyed, when they have heard people described in negative terms, such as these labels, they are more likely to consider somebody dangerous. Conversely, when they hear someone described in people first language, which would be, for example, a person with a felony conviction or a person with prior convictions, they're far more likely to have a positive association. And we know that makes sense, right? Nobody wants to be described as perhaps the worst thing they've ever done. And it's not a fair representation to do so. So we will be using people first language in today's presentation. Just a little bit more about the East Bay Community Law Center. We have a dual mission where we're advancing racial justice through direct service and education and advocacy. And so we have 3 practice areas. We have including housing, health, immigration, and I'm in Clean Slate. We resolve intersecting legal challenges caused by poverty and racial injustice. We do this also in partnership with the law school at Berkeley, so that we can be training lawyers in how to be dedicated service providers in the future, and practice aspects of our holistic legal services model. And we also advance statewide policies written and championed by both our advocates and our partners in this work. And in Clean Slate, we use both legal and policy strategies to remove barriers that are related to conviction and arrest records and that have been contributing to the preservation and perpetuation of unjust and racially discriminatory systems. I'll pass it to Molly.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see all the different colleges that everyone's from and across the state and how many people there are today. So that's really exciting. But as I just mentioned earlier, I'm from Legal Aid at Work, and we are a civil rights organization providing legal services for working people who have problems at work or related to work. And we offer Know Your Rights trainings and workshops for those with prior convictions and to organizations who serve those with prior convictions, disabilities, or any of our 7 program areas. So I'll go over a little bit some of this a little bit later, but for instance, some of the services we help with is if you were rejected after a conditional job offer, we can help write letters to your employer who rejected you after they saw prior convictions in your background check. And we also offer free one-on-one legal advice, not only in your job search and application process, but also once you've obtained the job and you've been discriminated on any of identities such as prior convictions, race, gender, disability, and other identities. And we also help file government agency complaints. So if an employer has done something just horrible, we're happy to help you with that by helping you file a claim as well. And we, as I said earlier, we run workers' rights clinics throughout the state, but you can feel free to call our main hotline number below, 415-404-9093. And just to add a note on the chat, I'll be monitoring it throughout today. And sorry, the sun. So if we have time and if it's relevant, I'll be kind of making a note while also keeping the name private. So feel free to ask a question that won't be recorded. Your name won't be recorded. And if we have time, we'll go over it. If not, we'll also provide our contact emails and we can talk further about a specific issue.
Thanks, Molly. And I'm just seeing all the introductions in the chat. It's so nice to see all the different colleges that people are coming from, as Molly mentioned. So we just have to give a brief overview of what California has done through its incarceration of adults and juveniles. It's estimated that 1 in every 3 adult Californians has some form of criminal record. And there are huge racial and ethnic disparities in who gets incarcerated in California. We know that Black people, as well as Latinx and Indigenous folks, face continuous generational damage to their families and communities because of California's racist history and practice of mass incarceration. And these racial disparities result from racist policies that have historically favored white people and harmed people of color. We see those racial disparities at pretty much every stage of the criminal system, whether it's in policing, whether it's in who gets bail and who doesn't, what crimes people are charged with, the procedure of how their case goes, including their sentence, and also post-release their experiences as well. And even though we think of California as a quote unquote, progressive state, we know that in California, the rate of imprisonment of Black men is 10 times that of white men, which is a worse ratio than Mississippi and Louisiana. And this visual representation shows the overrepresentation of some races as well as the underrepresentation of others. And specifically, we see on the left side of the graphic, particularly with regards to Black residents of California and Latino residents of California, a stark difference between the population level demographics and the population in prison or jail. Specifically, we see with Black Californians, although they're 6% of the population, they're 27% of our prison and jail population. And similarly, we see an increase with Latino residents, and then we see underrepresentation of white Californians in the system, from 40% to only 26% of the system, as well as Asian Americans and with Native Americans staying about the same. So as we mentioned, we know that this is the product of a mass system of racist policies and structural racism that drive these outcomes. A little more about what we do at Clean Slate, and there are many Clean Slate offices and services throughout the state. So although I'm talking about East Bay Community Law Center, there are many resources out there in different counties that hopefully are doing similar work. We assist individuals accessing available remedies for their arrests and conviction records. You may have heard people describe, getting their record expunged, or, having a clean slate, as we even use in our own language. We want to be clear that in California, it's very hard and almost impossible in most cases to fully erase a record. However, there are many remedies that allow people to reduce the impact of how that record will show up in situations, for example, where they're seeking employment or doing a background check for a certain type of employer. So for example, you can file to dismiss or reduce the level of a conviction, for example, a felony to a misdemeanor. You can file to seal an arrest record, and I'll give you some more examples on the next slide. And so one thing that we do up front is just help people understand what is even on their record, right? That is something, what happens in court is so, often stressful and unclear, and may have been some time ago. And so a lot of people just benefit from actually getting a copy of their own record and going through it with someone with legal knowledge about what it actually contains. And how it might be considered by future employers, depending on what it contains. We also provide advice and counsel to people who are seeking jobs or different licensing opportunities, and we'll talk more about that, or if they're having issues with background checks. For example, a background check showing something on it that's incorrect. We also do various forms of employment advocacy, communicating with employers on behalf of folks in some cases, helping prepare them for conversations with employers. And we also do, as I mentioned before, policy advocacy. So we're constantly trying to look for where does the law need to go from where it is right now for people to truly access opportunities despite having records. And how do we best remove those and help them seek liberation? And what we've seen is that the model does work and improve outcomes. We've done studies on our own clients where we have found that 80% of people who came to us who were unemployed were able to find jobs after working with us. We found that there also was increases in their annual salaries by somewhere between $4,000 to $6,000 after working with us. And 83% of our clients said that going through a clean slate increased their confidence in the job market. And that is a big part of seeking jobs, as we all have probably sought jobs in our life. It is a nerve-wracking process without a record. And for someone with a record, that can be even more daunting and really important to build up a sense of confidence and belief that at the end of that process, it will be a job opportunity. So this is just a quick listing of the different, it's not all, but a lot of the main record remedies available in California under our state law. As I mentioned, the most common one is considered a dismissal. You might have heard of it as a 1203.4 dismissal. That's the section of the penal code that it references. Again, when people say expungement, they're usually talking about a dismissal under that part of the code. Something important to note about dismissals is that there are limitations. Not every case is available to seek dismissal. So a lot, unfortunately, of prison sentences are not eligible for dismissal. There are some exceptions to that, and that's why it's very important to seek legal counsel in finding out what remedies might be available for someone. We also help folks try to end their probationary sentencing early. And in fact, there was a state law passed last year that did that for folks, reducing most misdemeanor probation from 3 years to 1 year and felony from 5 to 3 with some exceptions. But we also help people file to end it early if they're eligible. We also help with arrest record sealings. There's 2 different kinds that you can seek in California, depending on the circumstances. As I mentioned, reductions of the level of someone's conviction. And then there are some specific types of relief available due to different propositions that Californian voters have passed, including Prop 47 and Prop 64, which may be familiar to you, which was regarding the legalization of small amounts of marijuana. We also help folks apply for certificates of rehabilitation and pardons. And there have been recent changes to the Penal Code 290 section, which refers to folks who are required to register as sex offenders in California. And now there are eligible folks who no longer would have to register if they're able to petition under this law and have that approved by a judge, depending on their conviction and how long they have already been registering. And so we're helping folks navigate that process as well. Another important piece to note, California has two main immigration-based remedies, which actually allow for full vacatur of a conviction. So unlike dismissals, a vacatur would actually fully remove a conviction. And these remedies are available for non-citizen immigrants who were essentially instructed or advised to plea to a conviction that actually was going to have a negative impact on their immigration opportunities. And it could have been that their attorney did not properly advise them, or that the court itself, the judge, did not properly advise them. But depending on the circumstances and the evidence that we can provide and collect on their behalf, people may be able to file for vacatur. And that would remove the barrier that they're facing to whatever that adjustment of immigration status is that they're seeking, whether it's becoming a legal permanent resident, avoiding deportation, or naturalizing as a US citizen. So at the time that a lot of record remedies, were introduced and the idea of getting a clean slate became popular, there was this kind of notion that, okay, if we just create these remedies, we'll get people's, cases expunged, and then all they'll need to do is, go seek a job, and they'll get the job once they have gone through a clean slate process or received a record remedy. And that would be a wonderful world. That I think it's a world that we want to all envision, is that there wouldn't be additional complicated barriers after someone has served their sentence. But we will share with you that it is still quite more complicated than that. And we don't share this to discourage anyone, but to encourage folks to actually seek, reliable resources and in some cases, legal assistance, to make sure that they're best informed for how to navigate some of the different forums they may encounter, or just circumstances they may encounter in their job searches. So this graphic, I'll just kind of walk you through an example of a clean slate client and some of the different work that we had to do with the client in order to address different things that came up in their case. So that first little bubble is actually, the last slide, right? We did the court-based remedies and were successful in receiving them. And then there still was a period of informing the client about, okay, this is what that record remedy does, and this is what it doesn't. It didn't remove your record, but it did prevent, for example, this type of employer from seeing that conviction when they run a background check on you. Then there was an issue where, even though they received the remedy in court, their Department of Justice rap sheet still never reflected that it had been changed, right? So when people were pulling from that rap sheet to do a background check, they were seeing misinformation and incorrect information, which is extremely common and something that we're regularly working on at the policy level to try to address. Errors in background checks are rampant. Then we had to go through counseling the client on how to apply for a particular type of occupational license that they were interested in doing. Occupational licensing are different, and we'll explain that later in a slide, but essentially educate the client around what to expect in that process. Then unfortunately, that licensing application was denied, and so there was an appeal of that denial, and then an additional hearing before an administrative law judge to argue about why that was wrong to deny that licensing opportunity. Then there was advocacy at the DMV to try to get their record cleared and corrected. And then ultimately, the individual was able to apply for a job, still had to explain things about their record in that job application process. And we were able to help them with that advocacy. And ultimately, they were successful in obtaining that job. So for some folks, there still is quite a complicated morass of stages and actors to interact with in the process. And I will now hand it over to Molly, who's going to share with you about the California Fair Chance Act.
Okay, and before I do that, there was a question about whether our organizations can help students in another state who is seeking employment in California. And so I just wanted to say that for Legal Aid at Work, at least, as long as it's an employer in California, we can potentially help, since the California Fair Chance Act applies to California employers that are at least five, have at least 5 employees. I'm not sure in terms of Rebecca's work, but if she wants to answer that really fast.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the record remedies piece, which is the court-based relief, if it is an Alameda County record, we can help them no matter where they live. We do have income eligibility restrictions because our services are free, but we can help with a record in Alameda County no matter where someone lives. And if it's a job or a licensing opportunity, again, that's in California, and depending on circumstances, I think we would be able to help as well.
And thanks to Rebecca, she's posting some resources in the chat. She'll also be posting it on the website as well. So if you want to check that either here or later on the website, feel free. But yeah, a little bit about the Fair Chance Act. It was passed in 2018, so it's a fairly new law. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about this before we go on to talking about different jobs folks with records can pursue and occupational licensing. So just wanted to give a very short summary of the Fair Chance Act. And so yeah, it's a recent civil rights law that was passed as an organizing effort by a grassroots organization called All of Us for None. And basically employers are not allowed to consider someone's prior convictions when they are applying to their job. They can only start considering your convictions after you've received a conditional job offer. And so that conditional job offer is often contingent around a background check. So even once they find that you have had a prior conviction through that background check, they must conduct an individualized assessment of your case, meaning that the conviction must be related to the job duties that you're applying for. And oftentimes your convictions are unrelated to those job duties. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next slide. And there are some caveats. There are a few things that are not covered by the ban the box law that I just talked about. And although we believe that the following employers must follow the interactive process and off-limits information, which I'll explain more below, this has not yet been tested by the courts because it's such a new law. But keep in mind that basically this law covers most public employers and also private employers with 5 or more employees. But the following employers you see here are not necessarily covered in the sense that they might be able to ask you about any prior conviction beforehand, but they'd still have to make a connection. And again, that hasn't been tested by the courts. So some of them include a state or local agency that's required by law to conduct a criminal background check, a criminal justice agency like a police department, a district attorney's office, farm labor contractors, and also laws that restrict employment based on criminal history or requires a criminal background check, like schools, healthcare, financial sectors, working with children. And so those are some of the employers that are not covered, but again, that's a smaller fraction. Next slide. So this slide just kind of like summarizes some of the issues that sometimes you'll run into in terms of applying for a job. And this slide shows basically where this law bans the box. It's really not only just the application where it's banned, but like where you have to check whether you've been convicted of a criminal offense. But So it's not just that, it's also in other places, like during an interview where somebody might ask whether you've been convicted. And obviously during the interview, you still haven't gotten the job. So it's something to consider. But what exactly does a conditional job offer even mean? And so sometimes the employer will say, congratulations, you've been hired, contingent on a background check, subject to a background check. So that sort of language. Next slide, please. Okay. And so this is about the interactive process that I kind of alluded to earlier. So if an employer does decide to rescind its job offer to you, it must participate in what's called the interactive process with you by sending you a written notification explaining their decision. So once you've received the notification, the employer must identify which prior convictions it has a problem with that they saw in your background check, and then let you know in that letter that that you can participate with them in the interactive process about it. But remember, as of now, and we're trying to change the law to make it longer because you only have 5 business days to respond to this notification. So you really should start gathering evidence now to show that you've rehabilitated and that this charge or conviction is not related to the job beforehand. Next slide. So the first thing we always tell folks is just making sure you ask for a copy of your background check now. Like during the job application process, there's usually some sort of process checkbox where you can request the background check that the employers also get. And just to note, these background checks are often very wrong or even incomplete. And so that's why it's important to check it beforehand. And sadly, some of the common errors in these background checks include not having a case resolved, even though the case was resolved. So maybe you weren't actually convicted, but that's not even showing up. Having even the wrong crime identified. We've had clients who were convicted of shoplifting and it's showing as burglary. Sometimes things will show up twice in your background check, even though it's the same arrest. Sometimes the clean slate process won't even show up. So employers don't even know that they can't even use that information because that's one of the disqualifying information that they can't ever consider. And we've also had situations where convictions that aren't for our actual clients that are showing up, like it's someone with a similar name or a similar social security number, and it's not even their conviction. So you have to realize how flawed these background checks are. So some helpful tips other than asking for a copy of those background checks is just also looking at the date that the background check was generated. Because if this was before the day you got your job offer, then they might have violated the law. So, because remember, they can't be checking your background even before they've extended the conditional offer. So if you've got the call or the letter saying that you got the job today, but the background check shows that they ran it, 2 days ago or 3 days ago before you even got the job offer, then there's something going wrong there. Next slide, please. So the most important thing to do is just to get ready now for this fair chance process. And that just means you might want to start writing a personal statement, which is a letter talking about ways that you've rehabilitated yourself since your time inside. Getting letters of support from people you think the employer might listen to, such as a parole agent, therapist, volunteer coordinator, etc. And then just getting your criminal court documents and maybe even running a background check yourself beforehand, considering all the flaws that can be in them. And you can go and get your live scan, fingerprinted criminal record, or just get a free commercial background check, since there are some websites where you can do that. Or you can look at background checks from a past job that maybe you didn't get. And you'll have evidence to show the employer that if there is a mistake in your background check, you can be prepared to explain your conviction records. All of those things you can do now before you even get a notice from the employer that they're rescinding your job offer and that they want to do the interactive process with you as a consequence. So just recognize that, you've taken a first step here today by being here, and also they're just being informed if you're a counselor and knowing about some of these issues that folks face with records, and just learning your rights and trying to understand what exercising these rights might entail. Next slide, please.
And Molly, I'll just raise up a question in the chat. Is there a reason that an employer could deny giving you a copy of the background check?
No, because they're required by law to provide it if you check the box or ask for one, because they're getting a background check on you if they're running one, if there's a conditional job offer, and so there shouldn't be any reason. Yeah, so next slide. Yeah, so this is just a little bit of more about like the evidence of rehabilitation. Like, so what are some things that can be evidence of rehabilitation from your prior conviction? So anything that could show the employer that you'd be a good employee and that they shouldn't care about your record. Oftentimes, this could be your education. Folks here are getting their education or have their education and they're qualified for the job, right? So you just want to emphasize that. Letters of recommendation, and this can really sound intimidating. So just asking a parole officer, that can change the dynamic, but oftentimes folks are happy to help you. Like even if it's asking a counselor from like a drug or rehabilitation or anger management class or counseling, cousins even, like there are a lot of folks that can attest to your character. And so volunteer pastors, coordinators, anybody. So just be creative and don't think that like you don't have anyone to vouch for you, because I'm sure there's somebody out there, because it could be family too. So just a tip, like you could also just say like, hey, I'm happy to even write out the letter for you if you want to just review it and sign it. Like that's always something good to kind of make things go faster. But it's just really important to remember that you can do a lot of this, like, ways that you could show rehabilitation now. And so just to start thinking about all of that. Next slide, please. And so some of the off limits information, and this is kind of goes back to the law itself, that employers can never ask about or use because it's just off limits according to the Fair Chance Act. So even if they accidentally get this information somehow, they can't just decide to take back your job offer due to this information. And these include things like being arrested but not being found guilty. So unless the case is pending or hasn't been resolved or you're still going to court for it, they can't consider just arrests that never led to any conviction. They can't consider your participation in diversion programs such as drug or alcohol class cases, even though you could use your participation in itself as evidence of rehabilitation. They can't use that against you. Dismiss convictions and just that were expunged. Some of the work that Rebecca has talked about and does in terms of cleaning the clean slate process. And then so if you did go through one of those clean slate processes programs, like the one Rebecca offers at EBCLC, they can't consider that. They also can't consider certificate of rehabilitation, and that's another sort of clean slate program remedy. If the record was sealed or you were pardoned by the governor, they can't consider that. Or even if this all happened when you were a minor in juvenile criminal court. So there's a lot of things they can't consider. And so knowing that is also really helpful in going through the process. But this is all why it's important to go through the expungement and clean slate process, because employers can't actually use that info against you anymore. But again, it can get tricky because these background check companies, even though all the effort was put into it, these background check companies sometimes have it wrong. But sometimes having that another thing on your side can really tip the ball forward in terms of getting a job. And in longer workshops, I always talk about like the interview process itself. And there are really many creative ways that you can go about this. So like, because it always catches people off guard. If you're in that interview and somebody says like, hey, I shouldn't be concerned about anything on your record, right? And and then people get freeze, right? So just also think about creative answers, like, no, there's nothing that you should be worried about, or nothing that would inhibit me from doing a great job in the line of work that I'm applying for. Remember, it's not your job, and it's against the law to be forced to reply about your job convictions during an interview or the process. So just keep that in mind, and just know that the law is moving towards your side, with the passage of the Fair Chance Act, even though it's very new. Rebecca, next slide. So the last slide I have here regarding like the Fair Chance Act process is the difference between a rap sheet and a background check. So I've talked to you a little bit about background checks, and it sounds horrible that a lot of it can be raw, false information. But just to talk a little bit more about the differences, is that a background check is an investigation done by a private company, and it contains limited criminal history information, but it also contains other information like your credit card, like your financial and your credit score and things like that. And it can be seen by a variety of people, like public and private landlords, for many reasons, but not everything from your past can be reported on the background check. As opposed to the rap sheet, it's based on your official government records, lists every encounter with the law, and it contains criminal history information only. And it's generally confidential, only by the courts and law enforcement officials can see that. So thank you.
Thanks, Molly. So we're going to just invite folks to answer, and you can put your answers in the chat. But we just wanted to solicit, what are some examples of jobs that your students or folks who are looking for jobs express to you that they're interested in pursuing? And you can just use, recent examples, but just pop a few in the chat. I'll also try my best to just acknowledge there is a website that we have in our materials. There's actually two websites for Clean Slate program. So one is called clearmyrecord.org, and that should link to a lot of California counties, however, not all. You can also go to the East Bay Community Law Center's Clean Slate website, and we actually have a list of every county in California and various offices in each county. And I also wanted to just acknowledge housing discrimination is a different topic than this training, but I will just say that some of the background check things that we're talking about does apply to what landlords can see. And there is progress, at least in the Bay Area. San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley now have different protections against discrimination on the basis of a record in the housing area. So hopefully that's the direction our state is going. There is a state level bill that's also being pushed for right now to do something similar. So I'm seeing social work, nursing, fire department, drug and alcohol counseling, corrections work, social work, teacher, mechanic, medical field, law, paralegal. Okay, these are great examples. Starting their own businesses. Absolutely, entrepreneurship is a big area, especially for folks with records who may find that it offers them more opportunities sometimes than they've been seeing in their own job search. The reason why we ask you this is because there have been many times where folks at offices like mine and Molly's are asked, hey, can you provide us the kind of the list of which jobs someone with a record is safe to apply for, or which industries they can seek safely with their record and not worrying about it preventing them. And that the existence of a list like that is not only a myth, but an impossibility, because whether someone's record is going to ultimately be a barrier, or at least something that has to come up during the process for them, depends on so many factors. And so we just want to, I'll go into that in the next few slides. But basically, similarly, when people ask us, hey, how do I just describe my conviction on an application? Well, as Molly shared, people shouldn't be having to be asked to describe stuff in most job interviews and applications at this point. However, When it comes to occupational licensing, which actually so many of the examples you all threw out fall under areas of careers where there is some additional step of licensing or regulation or certification that someone has to seek from often like a state level board or agency, this does still come up. They are, depending on what type of board or agency they are, often able to inquire of someone what is on their record and to talk about it. And so this is a really important part of understanding and guiding students who are looking for jobs in these careers, is that they have to be extremely careful to answer those questions correctly and seek help if they don't know how to answer those questions. So some of the things that will determine how they answer questions would be, what is the job, what is the employer, what's on their record, and when I say employer, I would also say board or agency. What remedies are they eligible for or have they received? That's all going to determine not only how they answer questions, but also how that record may or may not impact them in that field. So one thing that's really important to distinguish is that there's kind of two major buckets. There's private and public employers. And so private employers are basically what we consider as your regular kind of private companies. These are non-government companies that don't work with what here is labeled as sensitive populations. And that's just terminology that might mean kind of children or elderly or adults or perhaps people with disabilities. Those areas of jobs tend to be more heavily regulated. Private employers generally, when they run a background check, that background check company cannot even show them convictions older than 7 years. If it was a prison sentence, then it would be 7 years from the release from prison or from when they finish parole. They cannot see arrests that did not lead to a conviction. What they can see would be arrests for a open case that's currently pending. For example, a recent arrest that has not been adjudicated yet. They cannot see dismissed convictions. So that large bucket that we talked about where people have been able to get a conviction dismissed, and they cannot see when someone's participated in some kind of diversion or other alternate type of program, which we might call a deferral program or deferred entry of judgment. So that's the good news, is that even on that background check, a lot of those categories of off-limit information shouldn't be showing up to them at all. With public employers, and when we talk about public employers, we're talking about government jobs, we're talking about jobs that might be in law enforcement, military, jobs that require some kind of security clearance or government issued license or certificate. These are jobs where someone is going to be asked to do a live scan fingerprint. That's a very different type of background check from what a private employer can just go by from a background check company. And so the live scan fingerprinting results are coming from the Department of Justice, the California Department of Justice itself. And not all employers have access to that. It's only these kind of specific public employers. We also put in this category some jobs within the healthcare field, as I mentioned, working with children or elderly adults. And in this area, because it does often show all convictions, even ones that have been dismissed, it is very important to understand if there are questions about someone's record, what they should be answering. Because some people, unfortunately, think that if they've gotten a case dismissed, they no longer have to disclose it. And for these types of specific licensing applications or government jobs, they may still have to disclose it. And to be clear, no college counselor should ever feel that they're in a position to know what would be disclosable or not. I'm sharing this information with you to, give a sense of what a student will need to do to seek as advice and more specific information to their system by a credible, a knowledgeable resource. So I think Molly covered most of these points that always ask for a copy of your background check. This is true when you're going through a public background check as well. You have a right to ask for a copy of it. And you also should always been asked permission to do so. And you should seek assistance in filling that out if you're being asked to disclose anything. And so one more note on occupational licensing. This, has really been the thorn in the side of advocates who have been trying very hard to break open the job market to people, to the 1 in 3 people with a record, right? Occupational licensing was always kind of the sticking point. There have been some really good additional laws put in place in recent years to try to expand opportunities, even through licensed and certified types of industries. So when we're talking about occupational licensing, we're talking about nursing, we're talking about social workers, even barbers, contractors. There's tons. It's about 1/3 of California jobs fall under some regulation or agency that needs to sign off on someone working in that field. And so in this area in 2020, a new law went into effect called AB 2138. It impacted many boards and licensing agencies that fall under the Department of Consumer Affairs. That there's information about that law in your handout, as well as the boards that it impacted. And it also really reduced what those boards can consider when they're licensing someone. And so, for example, dismissed convictions under those boards no longer can be considered as a reason to deny someone a license. Again, a good reason to go seek out clean slate services before seeking licensing opportunities. And again, we'll just reinforce someone who's applying for licensure with a record really should try to seek out legal advice if they have questions about how to navigate that. And now we're going to try with our remaining time to do just a couple examples of situations that could come up in someone's counseling office with their students. And so I'll invite Karnik to join me for our first one. We will be playing a counselor and a student. Hi, Karnik. How are you doing today?
Hello, Counselor Rebecca. I'm good.
It's great to see you. How can I help you today?
So I've really been enjoying a lot of my biology and chemistry classes. And I've been thinking that I might want to try to pursue something in medicine after I graduate, maybe like nursing or even medical school if I can.
Great. Well, the healthcare field is booming. I think that's a really wonderful area to go into. So how can I help you pursue that?
So right now, the biggest thing that I'm worried about is that I have a felony conviction. I have a record, and I don't know how hard that's going to make it, or if I can even go into the medical field with that.
Yeah, wow. Unfortunately, as a convicted felon, I'm not sure that that's going to be the best path for you. I think you're going to run into a lot of trouble in that field. People might be afraid you're going to hurt the patients. There's just, a lot of reasons why they're going to give you pushback with that felony record. So, I would be happy to help you consider other career paths. Have you thought about working in construction?
I don't think I had before, but I guess I could do some more research on that.
Yeah, think about it and we'll talk soon. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, we will debrief that in a moment, but we're going to do another role play first.
Good morning, Counselor Rebecca.
Hi, Karnik. So nice to see you this morning. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm great. I'm enjoying the sun. So what are you thinking about for your postgraduate experience?
So I'm thinking that I might want to try to do something in medicine. I've been really loving the biology and chemistry classes I've been taking. So I'd love to do like nursing or some kind of like x-ray tech, maybe even medical school down the road.
I'm so happy to hear that, Karnik. You're such a caring person. I could see you doing extremely well in that field, and your patients would be very lucky to have you. So are there any questions I can answer for you, or how can I support you in this search?
So the biggest thing that I'm worried about right now is that I have a criminal record. I was convicted of a felony not too long ago, and I don't know if that's going to stop me from being able to do something in medicine.
Thank you, Karnik, for sharing that with me. I know that that's not always easy to talk about, and I appreciate you being willing to explain that. And, you know, the good news is that there's been a lot of changes in both the medical field and many other fields where there's an expansion of opportunities for folks in this line of work, even for people with conviction records. So one thing that I can share, you know, I'm not an expert in this area myself, but I have heard that there are programs that can sometimes help people maybe reduce their record or do something to help them when they're looking for jobs with the record. And so I'd be happy to provide you with some resources for where you might get connected with some of those services. And in fact, there's even a website that you can go to that's called clearmyrecord.org. I'll write it down for you. And that could actually allow you to apply for some of those services online on that website. So I would really encourage you to do that. Let me know if you need help filling that out. And the other thing I might think about now, I know it's really early, you're just kind of, you know, wondering about these careers, but you may want to speak to a legal organization just about how your record may or may not be an obstacle down the road and whether there's anything that you can do depending on the type of, you know, specific line of work you might be thinking about. I've heard that it could be different for nurses or doctors. And so I don't want to weigh in on that, but I can help connect you as well with some legal organizations if that's helpful. And I actually have some handouts as well that I'll share with you now.
That would be so great. Do you know if those legal organizations, if they charge a lot to help with this kind of stuff?
You know, I don't know about all of them, but I do know that a lot of them are free for folks who don't have, you know, who are making under a certain amount of money. And so my hope is that as a student, that their services would be free for you as well. And I would definitely ask them that when you reach out to them.
This is all great. Thanks so much for all of this.
You're welcome. I can't wait to see you out in the field. Come back and visit me.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so we'll pause there and just hopefully you all were able to see some of the differences in the receipt of that information and the response. And, you know, they were quite extreme, but we do want to just share with you that sometimes people do get a lot of discouragement. It's not just from counselors, but people in their family and their lives. And that has a huge impact on someone's own ability to think and dream for their own future. So it's really important to, you know, as we showed, connect folks with resources, keep an open mind. And, you know, this is not to paint a rosy picture that everyone will get every job that they'd like with a record. Unfortunately, we're not at a place in the world where that may be true yet. However, there's really a lot more out there and a lot of reasons for why people should be connected with help if they're seeking jobs in these fields. So we'll do one more and I'll invite Molly to join me.
All right, and then just to talk a little bit about a question that we had in the chat that's a bit related about like whether it's mandatory to have that box in the application. So if you're talking about the box where it asks if you have any prior conviction history, I'm sorry if I didn't make it clear, you actually should, no application should have that box. And in fact, if they do, you can report them to the DFEH, and that's on our resources handout that Rebecca emailed and we'll post on the website. Basically, you can report employers, and as sad as it is, the Fair Chance Act was passed almost 4 years ago, but last summer we did a pilot where we just like looked around and just on, I think, basic Craigslist postings, and we saw over 500 employers still asking about convictions, 500 job postings. And so just know that it's very common, but it's illegal. So you can report them, and now there's tools for that. But yeah, so we'll just go on to this brief role play.
Molly,
Our
just to
last one.
clarify, the question was about the box requesting a copy of the background check.
Oh, gotcha. So usually there should be a box on the application, and if there's not, you can talk to the employer directly.
Okay, thanks, Molly. And so, okay, in this scenario, I will be playing the student and Molly will be playing the counselor. Hi, Counselor Molly.
Hi, Rebecca, how you doing?
Molly, you know what? I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm so upset today. I was so pumped about this interview that I had this morning. I put on my suit. I was feeling good. I walked into that interview ready to get that job. And what did they do but asked me point blank, is there any reason to be concerned that something might come up when they run my background check? Which like,
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about that.
yeah.
That doesn't even sound legal. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that there's some laws protecting you, especially in California, about asking about your prior convictions like that.
Really? Okay, that's cool to hear. I didn't know about that. Yeah, because I got really nervous and I actually just, like, I told them about my drug possession charge, and then I kind of just like gave up a little in the interview, like hopefully it still went okay, but thanks for sharing that with me.
Yeah, no problem. And it sounds like they did violate the law and what they did was illegal. So I want to just give you some resources that I found on a legal aid organization's website, a flyer with information about the law itself, and a toolkit so you can work on responding to this employer and also maybe reporting them as well. So here are some resources as well.
Thank you. I'm really going to consider doing that, actually. I really didn't like that happening to me. So thanks so much for that information.
Yeah, remember you have 3 years to file any sort of complaint or violation. So if you want to focus on getting the job first, that's totally fine too. So it's up to you.
Cool. Okay, great.
Yeah. And then there's a question about whether there are particular background checks where background checks are done. And that also is a mixed bag. So there are multiple and dozens of different background check companies, and the mistakes seem to vary. But it seems like across background check companies, there are mistakes being made about people like prior convictions. And so the most important thing is like not which background check company runs it. It's more how can you catch them before the employer tries to use that against you.
I did see, we're almost out of time. I did see a question about live scan. If someone's doing a live scan background check, what, I think they're asking what category employer does that employer fall into? And usually that would be that bucket of public that I was talking about. However, it depends on the employer. And I think there was a specific question about someone's community college, and I believe Rebecca had pointed to some resources on the Rising Scholars website about the Chancellor's Office's guidance on hiring folks with records in the community college systems. I also just wanted to, there was a question about felony reduction, and I didn't want to mislead the audience that not all felonies can be reduced to misdemeanors. There's only certain categories of felonies that can. One is called a wobbler, where it could have been charged as a felony or a misdemeanor. There's also under Prop 47 and Prop 64, some other categories as well, including certain theft crimes and marijuana related crimes. So we're apologies for not being able to address all the questions in the chat. We will just share our contact info here on the last slide.
But I really appreciated the comment about modeling best practices and not every counselor having the opportunity to be encouraged to come to events like these. And so I think the answer to that obviously is hopefully they can be encouraged to come to events like these, but also just as a co-counselor with them, you can encourage them with your practices and your opinions and ideas and what you've learned. So we really appreciate you being here today and taking the time to learn more about these different laws and situations.
Yes, thank you so much for your time today, and to Rebecca for organizing.
Yeah, Rebecca and Molly Incarnate, on behalf of all, we have 116 community colleges, 2 million students, thousands of formerly incarcerated students, and we can't thank you enough. So we will probably be reaching back and asking for more help again later. So thank you. And I put it in the chat, everyone, but the recording will be on the VRC, and all the things I posted in the chat will be on the Rising Scholars Network webpage. I will get to that by the end of today, so they'll be there. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good Friday, everybody.
You all.
Take care.
Take care.